Forbidden Rite Pathfinder in the Crucible League. Self-cast poison, mind you. Got some gameplay here, some Uber Exarch, Uber Eater after, and a little bit of mapping as well. But let's talk a bit about the build itself. This league has changed a few things, and this is also going to be my final video on the build, barring any massive changes. As a result of the future being quite filled, we have Diablo 4 coming up. We have Darkest Dungeon 2 and its launch coming up, which I have some responsibilities with. We also have the Torchlight things coming up, Torchlight Infinite, which I might dabble a bit more in to see if I can vibe with the game after all. But yeah, it's been a wonderful league again, not because of the league mechanic, but the base game of Path of Exile, of course, being wonderful. Personally, I wasn't too big of a fan of Crucible League. I haven't really heard many positive things about people, although some individuals are very colorful about their opinions on Crucible League. So I wonder what you think. Did you enjoy it, or was it also kind of a dud for you? What isn't a dud, though, is the fact that I can stand still here on Uber Exarch, as you can see. Without having to move once, I can kill an Uber boss. If that doesn't tell you this build has potential, then I don't know what is. We also have a little bit of Uber here, Uber Eater, to be exact. Uber Eater is a bit of a problem for us due to the way that we have our defensive layers. It's very physical heavy, and we don't have a lot of physical mitigation due to the fact that we are pretty much trying to convert most of the physical damage taken into elemental damage taken, but as a result of me not having a Watcher's Eye, that is like the perfect double purity of elements Watcher's Eye, I instead decided to go with a Grace option, which does give me some dodge, but of course it means I have less max hits, so it's a little bit of a gamble if I can get through this with having to at least take a portal again if I die. But that one was pretty clean, luckily enough. Also a little bit of mapping. I'm still struggling trying to wrap my head around Shield Charge and Rolling Blades. For some reason, I cannot get them to feel smooth for me. I do not know why. They just don't vibe with me. I don't like these continuous movement skills. Luckily enough, there are ways to deal with this. Although I do think in terms of damage and consistency and overall well-roundedness, this version is best. But you could run a Quicksilver, right, and get Onslaught elsewhere, or Synthesized Ring, all that stuff. We'll talk about it in just a little bit. But as you can see, we are blowing up packs. We're not dying. We're destroying everything on sight. We're not going to get killed. Even we could stand still and let the enemy kill themselves on us due to our cast on damage taken link, right? Which you can see proc relatively quickly at the bottom right there as well. And it's been a wonderful experience once again. One of my favorite builds, if not the favorite build still, the Forbidden Rite Pathfinder Poison Selfcast. And I hope that in the future we'll have some like extreme new tech. Maybe I have to look into maybe making an armor version on the Occultist, maybe get some block, maybe a Necromancer, who knows? We have options, but who knows what the next league brings. Anyway, let's get into the thick of the build, and we'll talk a little bit about the gear and the spec, and some alternative options that you could possibly do yourself. So let's talk a little bit about the passive tree. Very similar, very typical Pathfinder Poison, so I'm going to run through it quickly. Otherwise, you can check out the POE link in the description box below. We go and skip Nature's Boon for an additional small passive note to get more flask effect, as we mostly have unique flasks with the Dying Sun, Taste of Hate, and Progenesis. We do pick up Nature's Adrenaline, Nature's Reprisal, and Master Toxicist still. Very understandably so. We pick up the basic life note at the beginning. We pick up enough flask effect to make sure that the spells that we want free are in fact free most of the time. Reservation, Trader Keystone, a wonderful combination, of course, in relation to the Micro Distillery Belt. The Brutal Restraint that gives us the Keystone. We do pick up Wasting right here with the Chaos Mastery. This in combination with our many, many, many hits and the new Ascendancy passive here, Nature's Reprisal. We're pretty much giving everybody 15 Wither debuffs almost instantly and permanently. We also still pick up the old improved Spell Mastery here, Spell Suppress Mastery, which used to be on the other wheel right here, but now has moved to the Evasion Mastery. We still picked it up as all of our pieces of gear have evasion, so that's perfect for us. It allows us to be very easily capped, as well as the life notes are wonderful. To quickly go down here, of course, more Spell Suppress, Jewel Sockets. We do pick up Fervor because our shield gives us a minimal of 4 maximum charges, but minimal of 4 frenzy charges permanently, but if you don't improve your maximum frenzy charges, you're capped at 3. So we do this to make sure that we actually have access to all 4 of them that we get, plus a little bit more evasion rating, because we are using Grace in this version. Not mandatory, but it's up to you. More life, a little bit of life mastery. Of course, we pick up natural remedies. We skip thick skin, so we do lose a little bit of life, but as you can see, we still have plenty of life left with 5.5k, which is more than enough. But you could sacrifice some points to pick up this wheel if you want to. It's what I did last week as well, but since I have points spent to fervor as well as this new wheel, I don't have the points to actually go down there this case. Plus, I'm using a large cluster down here with 2 medium clusters. You got your Spite Concoction, your Fasting, your Brute for Potency, Flow of Life, very typical combos. We have Touch of Cruelty just to get that Hinder debuff, in addition to Unspeakable Gift, which is massive for clear. Careful Conservationist for more flask charges, as well as increased flask effects. Your Fatal Toxins with a Poison Mastery to do poison faster, which is really, really quality of life. Incredible life wheel right here, and life is important because it also scales the damage of your Forbidden Rite, but also makes you tankier and helps with the recoup and all that good stuff. We pick up a Storm Shroud, and normally we would run Purity of Elements, which is probably the more graceful way, ironically, to do, but since we have a special Crucible node, which allows this to become active, we can just tag this in and actually use something else as opposed to Purity of Elements. In this case, I decided to go with the wonderful Grace that I've been running on my tree to get a bunch of evasion, which really, really helps against burst damage. Of course, this wonderful new wheel, the Recoup wheel, the Circle of Life with the Recovery Mastery, which makes Recoup even nuttier, making it 25% faster, going from 4 seconds to 3 is absolutely insane. This wheel also makes it so that you can possibly not even have to use Stasis Prison at all if you use a correct anointment and some interesting other tree specs, which is very, very good. Very lovely for us. We pick up some more life here and some strength, which might be useful for some people that have no strength on their gear. Of course, Serpentine's Spellslinger, incredible with the crit mastery, the new crit mastery. Normally we would have the cursed one, where it's 40% reduced extra damage from critical strike by cursed enemies. But now we just simply make them not be able to do crits at all, which is even better. And we're applying poison a lot better than we are applying curses. So this is just a massive improvement in consistency against anti-crit. Another large cluster with the typical expected unspeakable gifts. Wicked Pal, that skill effect duration is comfy, and Unwavering Evil to have an answer to stuns. On top of that, we have Brute for Potency, Flow of Life again, and another Brute for Potency, Flow of Life. We go down here, and we pick up Steeped in the Profane, which allows us to actually also pick up these 2 curse effect nodes. Curse effect in this build is incredibly powerful. It does cost 2 travel nodes, so if you run Purity of Elements, you could theoretically drop the Storm Shroud. You should drop the Storm Shroud, but as opposed to actually putting a useful jewel in there, you could maybe go for an Impossible Escape, Pain Attunement, and then just manually spec this. This saves you 2 points. And you can maybe put those elsewhere. Maybe get some more cast speed and poison damage, or pick up some other masteries. Who knows? Speaking of things to pick up, I went actually for Toxic Strikes, but we'll get to that in just a second when we are talking about the gear. So let's address the gear that we are wielding. It is the Crucible League, so let's start with the relevant pieces. The Rune Dagger, a wonderful craft. I've got a video on how to craft this beautiful thing on my YouTube channel. But of course, the Crucible tree is new. I've decided to only go for 3 because I couldn't hit a 4th one that was proper. Instead, I've just settled for cast speed, which is incredible. We have explicit physical and chaos damage modifier magnitudes. I would have preferred improved curse effect here, but this one's pretty nice as well, as it does improve our chaos damage over time multi and chaos damage mods on our Rune Dagger, which is quite powerful. And a little bit of a weird one, a level 25 Divine Blessing support, so that we can run, as you can see, the inspiration, haste, and increased duration on our weapon as opposed to our glove. On shield, it is a very typical synth shield. As you can see, we got the frenzy charges, we got the basic life slams, also a crafting video up on the YouTube. But the Crucible League provides us with increased implicit modifier. This allows the frenzy charge implicit from +2 to become +3, hence the 3 minimal charges. And on top of that, we have a little bit of resistance. But also an additional frenzy charge here again, which gets us to 4, hence the weird spec on the Atlas, or at least on our skill tree, and then also a minimum endurance charge, because that's just nice. And to top it off, a 100% chance to avoid being shocked, which allowed us to use the Storm Shroud Jewel in our passive tree to become ailment immune, or elemental ailment immune, which is very comfy. So from top to bottom, we have a very wonderful helm. This is probably one of the best helms I've ever crafted. We got the best enchant. I still have to enhance the implicits, but I kind of got lazy about that. We have the +2 socketed AoE with area, the wonderful Fizz to Ellie conversion, benchcraft, essence, strength, tier 1 elemental res, and tier 1 spell suppress. An incredible helm for this build. The necklace is a typical increase effect of curses, one of the strongest mods to empower both offense and defense due to increasing the power for your poisons due to temporal change becoming better, as well as despair, but also temporal change slowing the enemies down further. If you have a extra curse you could apply due to a corruption on this ring, you could also add enfeeble, which would be even more tankiness you could give yourself as a result of that, which is incredible. Sadly, I could not find it or hit it this league. I've tried, and I was made very poor because of it. Things that make me very poor as well is this shiny stasis prison. I did not search for a shiny, I just looked for a good roll one. This was the cheapest good roll one. As you can see, 100% damage taken recoup with a high roll life and a high roll debuffs on you expire faster with the 8% increased explicit life modifier enchantment, which makes it 108 recoup on this chest alone. Speaking of recoup, we have the basic recoup rings. Crafting video is up on the YouTubes as well, but it's pretty straightforward. Cast speed, tier 1 recoup, a good suffix. We got the mana craft to reduce our mana cost. We got the lucky Crusader Slam. This is the first time I hit it in like 25 attempts of crafting this ring, including last league where I never hit it. Of course, also the Life Unveil, a very similar ring on the right side, but with a failed Crusader Slam. As you can see, this is maximum energy shield. And instead of an elemental res, we happen to hit a regenerate, which is still nice because that scales also with the catalyst that we add on top of these rings to maximize the mana cost reduction from -7 to -8. The glove, also incredible. Again, tier 1 spell suppress, tier 2 elemental res, tier 1 chaos res. Fractured life, socketed AoE gems, area of effect on top of that. Nice roll with a little bit of damage during any flask effect. Benchcraft to top it off. No enchantment here. Couldn't find the cold one that I wanted. Not necessary either, but we do have the chaos damage over time multiplier and a chance to suppress spell damage. Normally, you would go with a chance to do poison damage on hit, but since we actually went with Anointment Toxic Strike, we could drop that one over here and actually went for spell damage, which allowed us to benchcraft cast speed as opposed to spell suppress, in case you were wondering about that. Because last league I did a steeped in profane anointment, which I now naturally spec'd into. Allowed me to anoint toxic strikes as opposed to essence extraction because I could keep my flasks up anyway due to my clusters and whatnot. So I could switch to toxic strikes. I could then leverage spell suppress in the glove and then craft cast speed here on the shield. That's kind of how that works. We also have the boots, the mandatory enchantment, of course the faster poison, a little bit of action speed, tier 1 fractured life, onslaught movement speed, not necessarily necessary because we have permanent onslaught due to our flask, but in case you run a quicksilver or something, that's another source of onslaught if you want to. We have hybrid life here, just to finish it off. What else am I going to really put on it? We have high levels of intelligence, tier 1 spell suppress, and a tier 1 elemental res as well. And of course, one of my best crafts I've ever made this league, or certainly the best belt I've ever crafted, this micro distillery belt. We got the enemy's withered enchant on it as well. Max rolled flask effect, reduced flask charges gained. Tier 3 life, which I rolled naturally into it, otherwise I would have bench crafted life. A tier 1 max rolled percentage life from the Hunter Slam, which is incredible, especially with the life catalyst. Chaos res tier 1, tier 2 strength, and a tier 1 increased flask charges gained to top it off. Incredible stuff. One of my most powerful belts I've ever crafted. We also have, of course, the Progenesis Flask, which is permanently up even if we're not fighting. We have the Taste of Hate, which is high rolled, permanently up even when we're not fighting. Alchemist's Silver Flask of the Order, which is permanently up, and with the reduced mana cost of skills to make our stuff a lot cheaper to cast. And a permanently up Dying Sun. Very frustrating, this thing. It's very needy. If you have a regular ruby, you can even optimize your build further if you are willing to sacrifice the AoE and projectiles, and maybe you can actually get curse immunity or more cast speed for single target. You do a lot of crazy things with that if you don't have to use the Dying Sun. But I was able to manage to get the Dying Sun to be active permanently with that particular enchantment, reuse the end of this flask effect, without having to anoint Essence Extraction. If you do find yourself having problems, Essence Extraction is going to be a wonderful solution. 25% increased flask charges gained. It's very powerful to get yourself situated. So let's go real quickly over the jewels we have in our build. We have a Watcher's Eye. In this case, this is primarily used for the phasing on haste, as well as the Malevolence unaffected by bleeding mod. Since I'm not using Purity of Elements in this particular setup, and I don't have Vitality active, which is not needed due to my Crusader Slam being successful on one of my rings, I can run different mods, which are very useful. It's just quality of life, and the bleeding is very comfy. Not being affected by that saved me plenty of times. We also have a Corrupted Blood immunity jewel. It's subpar at best. It's just what I happened to found during my farming strat. So there it is, just Corrupted Blood with some cast speed, some poison damage, and a little bit of recoup. Going down, we have, of course, the Storm Shroud, which is allowing us to become ailment immune due to our our Crucible mod. On top of that, we also have just a basic life flask effect duration damage they can recoup as life mod right here, as well as a little bit of cast speed, max life, recoup, because I found that the Chaos.multi mods were way too expensive to justify, and I was actually planning to getting a Flesh Flame Jewel combo here, so I didn't feel like investing too deeply into it. But sadly, I couldn't find my hands, or couldn't get my hands on an affordable Gathering Winds, or any other good ones that I wanted to perhaps try. We do, however, have a damage over time, cast speed, max life, damage recoup jewel right here, which is pretty lovely. And that pretty much sums it up, in addition to, of course, the obvious Brutal Restraint, Balbala, 6335, giving us access to flask charges, faster poison, critical strike chance, which is useless, although it might help with careful conservation just a little bit, as well as the flask charges here on ballistics. And that sums it up pretty much. So to quickly go over the links and the gems, we have in our weapon Inspiration, Haste, Val Haste, as well as increased duration. Normally this is combined with a Divine Blessing gem, but we have that from our Crucible. So in a non-Crucible situation, you would most likely run that on your glove, and then you can use the glove link, which for us is the spare anomalous cast when damage taken. You put that in the weapon and you switch the haste into the glove, which of course gives you the 4 gems needed to run the Divine Blessing. But instead, this leak, we don't have to do that. We have instead teched in the Arcane Search, Divergent Arcane Search, for an extra 2 seconds to give ourselves more cast speed, something that otherwise would not necessarily be possible without sacrificing something like increased duration, which you could also do. You just have to click your haste more often. It's up to you if you feel comfy with that. In our helm, we have our auras with Enlightened, Malevolence, Grace, instead of Herald of Purity, or not Herald of Purity, I mean Elements of Purity, as we are getting our ailment immunity from elsewhere, as well as Herald of Agony for the poison. In our shield, we have faster attacks and shield charge. You can use Rolling Blade. If you don't like movement skills, you can also use a Quicksilver and find a different source of Onslaught. Maybe you can run a wonderful Onslaught for 4 seconds on hit ring. Would be quite powerful if you want to do that. That's probably what I'm going to be switching into for mapping. Other than that, you can also, if you're willing to sacrifice your movement skill, you can tech in another cast when damage taken link, or maybe some additional auras, depending on what you have access to. It's up to you. But otherwise, faster attacks and shield charge or whirling blades is probably the best in combination with an onslaught flask, because then you have permanent juiced onslaught as a result of 3.20, changing the way the onslaught buff works, allowing you to actually scale it with flask effect and such, which is why it's so effective for us. On the boots, we have GMP, cast when damage taken, Forbidden Rite as a result of our Stasis Prison. If we did not have Stasis Prison, I would recommend Blazing Salvo, as well as our Purifying Flame, Divergent to make sure that the enemies take increased damage if they stand in that consecrated ground, And then, of course, in the Stasis Prison itself, our 6th link, we have a Divergent Forbidden Rite, an Awakened Void Manipulation, the mandatory Anomalous GMP for the cost reduction, Awakened Unbound Ailments, Anomalous Spell Echo, not Awakened. Awakened doesn't really do anything for poison. Anomalous on the old quality will give us cast speed still, so that's why we go with that one. And then we have an Awakened Deadly Ailment support. So that's pretty much what I would recommend. It is entirely up to you if you want to switch things about. But that is going to be it this league, most likely for me. Hopefully you have enjoyed the build. I know a lot of you guys are playing it as well and have enjoyed immensely the power of the self-cast Poison Forbidden Rite Pathfinder. We'll see if it survives next league, or perhaps we can innovate even more, or perhaps change it up altogether. Who knows? But thank you so much for watching. You guys have been lovely. I will see you guys around, as the upcoming weeks are going to be very busy. Have a good night. Take care. And I'm out.